Hi everyone, and welcome to the first video in a new series, ladies and gentlemen. Excellent. And we are going back in history, back to the 16th century, because we are looking at Elizabethan England, 1558 to 1588, 30 years of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Now, she was one of our greatest monarchs, one of our greatest rulers. But she was actually queen for 45 years, 1558 to 1603. But for us, for the GCSE exam, ladies and gentlemen, we're just concentrating on the first 30 years, 1558 to 1588. Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabethan England. Now I've got my crown and I have the sceptre, a symbol of the power of the king or queen at that time. The crown and the sceptre. Elizabeth I. What sort of queen was she, and what sort of country was she ruling at that time? Now, the videos will be in 3 separate sections, ladies and gentlemen. The reason for that, a simple one, because that's how they break them down for your syllabus. And that's how your teachers will be teaching you. Section 1, we'll call that the Queen, Government and Religion, 1558 to 1569. So it's the start of her reign and the first 10 years, roughly the first decade of her reign. What was going on in England at that time? Section 1, coming soon. Section 2, 1569, so she's been queen for about 10 or 11 years, through to 1588, the end of the syllabus. Challenges to Elizabeth here at home in England and abroad. Who was involved in challenging her power, her authority, and did they succeed? So that's section 2, challenges to the power of Elizabeth. The third and final section looks at the whole 30 years. Elizabethan Society, back here in England, what was life like? For example, education, leisure, what did people do to have a good time? But also voyages of discovery, the age of exploration. Many people, many sailors from England were sailing out and exploring and discovering new parts of the world. And that also is in section 3. So there are the 3 sections that we'll be looking at over the next series of videos for you. Now, Queen Elizabeth I. Question, what was her surname? Any ideas? Of course, you all know it. She was called Elizabeth Tudor. She was the last of the Tudor king and queens, the last of the Tudor dynasty or family. Now the Tudors, they ruled England for 118 years. It started off with her grandfather, Henry Tudor. Now, he became known as Henry VII, King Henry VII. He started off as Henry Tudor. How did he become the king? Have you got any ideas? Well, here's a bizarre little clue. A horse. A horse, what's that got to do with things? Well, here's a second clue. Charge into battle. Kill the enemy. We will take over. Yes. Back then in history, ladies and gentlemen, one of the ways of becoming king or queen was by conflict, by fighting. And in 1485, we got the last battle in a very large conflict gone on for many, many years in Britain called the Wars of the Roses, the War of the Roses. York versus Lancaster, the Red Rose and the White Rose. And in 1485, we had the very last battle, the Battle of Bosworth. And Henry Tudor won that battle. And in that battle, the king, the previous king, King Richard III, Allegedly, he was knocked off his horse and then surrounded and killed. And William Shakespeare, the great playwright, wrote a play and said, "A horse, my kingdom for a horse." That's the words he put into King Richard's mouth, because being off his horse meant he was killed more easily. And just as a little bit of an aside for you, some of you might know that just a few years ago, they actually found the bones of King Richard when they were digging up a car park in Leicester. So 1485, we see the start of the Tudors, King Henry VII, 1485 until 1509. When he died, as was the tradition, the oldest son took over. Now, the oldest son actually had died before him, a man called Arthur. So his next son, the next eldest son, took over from Henry VII. Do you know his name? Possibly the most famous king in all of our history. King Henry VIII, very, very famous for his 6 wives, etc. So Henry VIII was the second Tudor, 1509 to 1547. And then he died. And then we get the third. Who took over from Henry VIII? Any ideas? A young 9-year-old boy called Edward VI. And he was king from 1547 to 1553. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 15. He never got married, so he never had any children. So, Elizabeth's grandfather, Henry VII. Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII. Elizabeth's step-brother or half-brother, Edward VI. 1553, he died. Then it's Elizabeth's half-sister or step-sister, Mary, sometimes known as Bloody Mary, 1553 to 1558. Now, she died. Her children, both of her children, daughters, they'd already died, so she had no surviving children. So 1558, finally, we get Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth Tudor became the Queen of England in 1558. That's just a little bit of background to the Tudors for you. Now, when she becomes Queen, what sort of country is she becoming ruler of? Queen Elizabeth I, 1558. Well, our current Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. Now, she became Queen 1952, 1953. So there's roughly about 400 years between Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Elizabeth II. Compare the two countries. What was England like then, 1550s, compared to what England has become now? Hugely different, ladies and gentlemen. A vastly different country. Now, go back. Population when Elizabeth I becomes Queen. About 3 million. Today, about 65 million. So there's one difference. A far, far smaller population. Go back. 1558. Scotland was a completely separate country, ruled by a different queen, Mary Queen of Scots. Nowadays, our Queen is Queen of Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland. So another difference there. Back in the 1550s, if you were lucky, you lived to about the age of 40. 35, 40 was about the average life expectancy. Some lived longer, of course, but some didn't. But the average was about 40. Now, Queen Elizabeth I, she lived to 70, so she had a very long life by the standards of the time. Nowadays, most of us live to the age of 70, 75, 80 and beyond. But back then, it was far, far different. What else was different back then? Well, they had no electricity. They had no gas. They would use candles to light things. They would use wood for fires. So it was a completely different society. Transport. Today we have planes, Trains, cars, they didn't. They walked, or a kingdom for my horse. That was the way of getting round at the time. Communication. They had no television, no radio, no phones, certainly no mobile phones like us today. To communicate back then, it was letters and writing. And the final couple of differences, which will be very important for us as we go through our videos. Back in 1550s, Queen Elizabeth, the king or queen, had power. The crown, the sceptre, they had power. They could make the laws. They could say, right, I disagree with you. You will be sentenced to death and executed. They had the power. Today it's not like that. Although we still have a queen, it's Parliament who make our laws today. So that's one big difference. And the final difference, back then, religion was hugely important, hugely significant. And there have been major changes during the time of the Tudors, something called the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Catholics and Protestants, there had been changes. Religion was very, very important to people. That played a part in Elizabeth's reign. We'll check it out in the later videos. So there we see it. Now, in your exam, 3 questions on Elizabethan England. Don't worry about them because we'll practice them throughout the videos and we'll look at various different examples. But just to put you in the picture straight away. Question 1 is a very simple, straightforward, describe 2 features. Those of you who've done Western Front or those of you who've done Whitechapel, you might have seen these sorts of questions before. Describe 2 key features. We'll practice that throughout the videos. Question 2 is a causation question. You have to explain why something happened. 12 marks. And they will give you 2 possible clues or 2 prompts or 2 points that you can write about. And you would have to write at least about 1 other from your knowledge. And the final question, they give you a statement or an opinion. And then they'll ask you, how far do you agree with this? It's a judgment question. You have to give your judgment. And again, to help you, they'll give you 2 prompts, which you can use. And then you can use at least 1 other from your own knowledge. Don't worry about the questions. We'll practice them. We'll look at examples over the next few videos. And you'll get very used to identifying what sort of things you've got to be able to do in the exam. This is just setting it all out for you, ladies and gentlemen. An introduction. Use the videos when they start coming online. Because remember, you can use me as sort of like your own personal history tutor on Tudor history. History tutor, Tudor history. That's the standard of jokes we're looking at. I know, you can't wait for more. Sorry about that. So, there's the first introduction for you. Over the next few days or so, we'll start looking in detail at the videos we need for our exam. Hope it's been useful, as ever. I'll speak to you soon. All the best now. See you later.